please get the lights out of my face?
Can we please move the lights?
You've just got done releasing 2 projects, one full-length album being Blue Hearts, and more recently a 4-song project in Andrea's EP. How difficult was it for you to release 2 projects in the span of just months?
You know, I think for a lot of artists in general, especially when it comes to something like music, inspiration can be really hard when it comes to even just making one song or one feature verse or whatever it might be for that artist or that musician. I think that thankfully, you know, I had experiences that allowed me to have inspiration to continue writing these tracks, not only on this album, but just songs that were maybe just personally meant for me and my personal projects. You know, there was about 300 tracks made in this time period, and only 25 of them actually got released to the public. So I think that inspiration can come in any sort of fashion for any artist. It's just what you actually decide to produce or make songs about that can become the hard part, and what you're okay with letting the public see in terms of your own vulnerabilities.
Obviously, as you listen to Blue Hearts, the themes become clear, filled with heartbreak, disappointment, and even frustration. How did these emotions lead to 21 songs of these emotions?
I think that when you're in a certain place as a music artist, trying to make certain songs that encapsulate your emotions is something that was important to me at the time and still is moving forward. And at the time, I was kind of in a place of abandonment and obviously heartbreak, because, you know, that's what this album and the last EP was mainly about. And encapsulating those emotions, you know, that wasn't really hard for me. I mean, I just got out of a long-term relationship that I hadn't pictured ending. You know, you go into a relationship expecting to be with that person. That's what it was for me personally. And that not working out led to even more toxic relations that I tried showing contributions to on the album. That was my inspiration for the album and all of my works that were, you know, in this time period. So encapsulating the emotion wasn't difficult. It was the audience. How do I let them know exactly how I felt? And again, what am I okay with actually sharing in those vulnerabilities? And these songs encapsulate how I felt at that time, and to an extent how I still do now.
The cover art of Blue Hearts. You're looking to the camera with blue hearts floating around you with letters inside of them. I also noticed that every finger has a ring except for that ring finger. What was your inspiration on the album cover?
So I actually remember earlier in 2025, just getting out of this long-term relationship that ended up inspiring this album and my future works moving forward. I was with my boy Zia, shout out to him, and we were overlooking the San Diego skyline, just talking about the women that were in our lives and, you know, phasing in and out, and what we actually wanted is deep conversation. And we were taking pictures just to like flick up on Instagram kind of thing, you know, kind of just give everybody an update, because, you know, we hadn't for a while. And I took this one picture and I was like looking right into the camera on, you know, his iPhone that he was just taking a picture on, and it was similar to what ended up becoming the Blue Hearts cover art. But I started writing these songs when I got home, because that was such a deep conversation that I had with, you know, my brother and my best friend. And I start writing these songs, and I start realizing, I'm like, you know, I might drop an album about this. You know, I hadn't been as inspired like that, especially about a certain situation or topic, in my entire music career at the time. And so we get that photo. I have all these tracks lining up. I'm like, I think I'm inspired to make something that was special here and special to me. And months pass. I end up finishing all these tracks. Again, it was about 300 tracks at the time. We pick what, in my opinion, was not only the best 21 for the album, but the 21 songs that made sense for the album, for the story I was trying to project of how I felt. We go out, And shout out my boy G Murph. He's been there through every step of the way since we were in second grade. I've been blessed to have these people around me for the time that I've had. And we take cover art images, basically inspired from that one photo that I had taken that one night with my boy Zia in like March of 2025. And after we had got the cover art and after I got the tracks, it was basically just deciding, like, do I really want to do this? Do I really want to be this vulnerable and open with how I actually felt? And blessed to be around the people that I had at the time to make that happen.
Would you say it's more their album than it is yours? Stack, there's 12 hearts on the cover. I mean, these women couldn't have all been significant, or were they?
To be honest, it is more their album than it is mine. I mean, this is the way that I felt, but they're the ones that impacted me. I mean, some of them were my whole life for a period of time, and some of them were just a matter of days. But it's not necessarily the time that I spent with the people who inspired me to make this body of work, but it was more so how they impacted me in the way that they did. I think that another important part of this album is not only who impacted me and the way that they did and how that left me, but it was also the people that were around me to actually help me get through, harsh periods of my life at the time. I have people that supported me. I had my mom, my dad, G-Murph, Zia, DC. I can keep naming, all my people that were, around me for this time and that helped me, and then even make me make, such a, in my opinion, a great body of work that, is a really honest representation of how I was. So even though it's my emotions and how I felt, without them, I don't have this album. I don't have these songs. I don't have these feelings to convey to whoever listens to this album. So I would definitely say it's more their album than it is mine. And, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with knowing that. And I think that the hearts on the cover are a good representation of that. It's not something meant to be negative, even though some of those experiences were. Because at the end of the day, they're in a heart, and that's all it is. It's all love. So, I think it's definitely their album, and I'm still blessed that those experiences happened the way that they did.
After listening to Blue Hearts, one of the main focuses was the ability or inability of communication. Why was this such a key focus, and how has communication affected you in past relationships?
I think that communication is one of those things that's so delicate, but it can be strengthened over time. In my previous relationships that, again, inspired me to make this, their problem, in my eyes, was their inability to communicate. And then when they would, it was miscommunication, not conveying how they actually felt, whether trying to lie or not lie, I don't know. But it was something that I value in every single relationship that I've been in, even in friendships, relationships with, people in my life, part of my family, bloodline, not bloodline. I value communication, and I think that my problem, admittedly, going into some of these relationships that ended toxic or in bad, negative ways, was my attempt to over-communicate. And I think that that was one of the mistakes that I look back on that, I understand. But again, I don't regret anything that happened to let me make, an album and all these songs, and even songs that didn't even get released to the public, that, only my closest steppers have really been able to hear. But communication was something that I wanted to focus on, not only in my relationships, but I wanted to convey that through the music. And, funny enough, the only way to communicate through the music is through communicating a message through the actual music itself. So that was something that was really important to me in all my relationships that I wanted to show through the music.
So you release Blue Hearts, then come back 4 months later and release Andrea's EP. Similar sounds, but on these 4 songs you sound more accepted and moved on. How and why did this shift happen?
I think one of the most important parts with music, especially to me, is being authentic. And I think it's best to write about emotions you feel in that present moment. It's hard to go back and try to write on something that you no longer feel, but you felt it at a certain point in time. The best time to write is when you feel it in that present moment. And when I had made Blue Hearts, those feelings of abandonment, detachment, sadness, heartbreak, confusion, those were emotions that I had felt at that time. So I wrote about those emotions. As time passed, and after Blue Hearts had already been written, produced, and released, I began to understand that, things are meant to happen as the way that they happen. And I began understanding, it's okay. Time has moved on, people had moved on, emotions had kind of been put to rest. And coming to terms with that obviously was difficult, but it's not the fact that I was trying to make similar sounds as like they were a part 1 and a part 2 series. It's just that moving on isn't as easy as people say. And so some of those emotions definitely still lingered at the time, and some of them still do now. So the shift was difficult, but people also have to understand that that's a slow shift in emotions.
A lot of fans of your music are calling this time period in your career the blues era. Do you see yourself as an artist putting out more music fitting this blue theme?
I've already said it, but I think that music is something that when an artist does it and decides to produce it, record it, whatever they're working on, it should be how they feel in that present moment. And when I released Blue Hearts and Andrea's EP, those are the emotions that I felt. What I recorded, what I wrote down lyrically, made beat-wise, the entire process of it, that's how I felt in that moment. Time has passed, music has passed, people have passed, I've moved on. I don't feel this, blue theme anymore, but is that to say that I don't feel that way in the future? No, emotions repeat all the time, that's what nostalgia is. So, I might feel this way again in the future, and, when I do, maybe expect a similar sound or a similar theme, maybe not the exact same because, experiences and these people will always be different, even if, they come back. But I'm working on different music right now. I'm working on different sounds. I'm being experimental, trying things outside of my comfort zone, things that I'm excited to work on because that's the way that I feel now that I've been able to move on. So I'm excited to see, what name these fans call, the next era of whatever music I decide to release and put out.
If you could say anything to these women who led you to producing these tracks, what would you say to them?
I would say that, what happened in our story was unfortunate. Things didn't work out with some that I wish it had worked out with. Some it didn't work out, and I'm glad that it didn't work out. But in different forms, in their own ways, they led to me being successful, whether in relationships, music, emotionally, monetarily. These women contributed to a part of me, and obviously, like I've said, this is their album. And so I would say that, obviously it's unfortunate and it can be, disappointing on some of the situations that happened. I think they're all a blessing in their own way. A lot of them hurt. I think that was pretty much displayed pretty well on the album. But, now that we've moved on and time has passed, in retrospect, without them, I don't have this album. I don't have those experiences. I don't have those emotions. They led me not only to making music, but, now I know how to approach other situations. Now I know when I feel a certain way, I'll have something to come back to and, understand other people, but also, more importantly, myself. And I think that Blue Hearts and Andrea's EP encapsulates that. It's a story of how I felt. It's a personal journal of how I felt, essentially. And, without them, that doesn't happen. So I'm thankful for them, even though, it just doesn't always work out.
I think you knew coming into this interview that you would get this next question. Andrea is mentioned throughout the Blue Hearts and Andrea's EP, obviously in the title and throughout the tracks. What happened between you and Andrea, and who was she to you?
Shortstack, what are you doing?
Yeah, still have jet lag, voice barely holding up. This ain't about how I sound though, that's what I'm saying. Yeah,